Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajra Dara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajra Dara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Pakyuke Kudan Da Gelu Pakyuke Sundan Da Ge Nga Pakyuke Tukdan Da Ge Chikdu Jingi Lo Makyuke Kudan Da Gelu Makyuke Sundan Da Ge Nga Makyuke Tukdan Da Ge Yi Tenyerme Chikdu Jingi Lo Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakya Muni Soha Sashi Pöge Chushi Meto Tran Rirabling Shini De Gembadi Sangye Shinto Mikde Ulwargi Drogu Namda Shingla Che Parasho Yedama Guru Ratna Mindrala Kam Niryata Yami Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chanamla Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsochi Dagi Chushe Gibe Sonamgi Drola Pinchira Sangye Drubrasho Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chanamla Chancho Pardo Dani Dagi Chushe Gibe Sonamgi Drola Pinchira Sangye Drubrasho Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chanamla Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsochi Dagi Chushe Gibe Sonamki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparasho Namo Hayike Dan Ludanajike Drubudadami Kenamdan Droba Kungi Dranam Chitsampa Tamche Ketu Dagi Chutento Qualunque cosa vogliamo raggiungere, qualunque cosa dobbiamo fare,
If there's anything we want to reach or anything we want to do, especially in the spiritual realm, but not only,
ricordare
we
che
always need to
dobbiamo
remember that
partire da
we
dove siamo.
have to start where we are.
Non è possibile
It's
passare
not
da
possible
dove ci siamo.
that it's not possible to start
Questo
where we're not.
è molto
And
importante
this is
all'interno
very
della pratica
important
della
within
filosofia
the
mondiale.
practice of and
Quando
the
Lama
philosophy, but
Michel
not
Rinpoche
only. It's Shilam
parla
Shilam
del
Dresum.
sentiero di riposa,
She is the
l'insegnamento
path.
della benedizione,
She
Lam Trebe Rinpa,
Shilam Dresum. So she is the path. Lam is
la base
she
dell'aspetto
is the path of the state of
il
fact.
sentiero e il
The
percorso di sviluppo,
the
il
path of
risultato è
transformation is the Lam, and De is
e una
the
delle cose più
result.
importanti in
These are these
questo
three.
è che il
And what's
punto
important
di
is that the starting point is where we are now.
quindi quando noi andiamo
So
a vedere i
when
vari
we
insegnamenti, sia
look
dal punto di
in
vista
various
filosofico, sia dal punto
teachings
di vista
from the point of view of philosophy
vajrayana,
or
cosiddetto del tantra,
the
con
so-called tantra
le varie
of the
pregane, visualizzazioni,
Vajrayana,
tutte le
with
cose
the
che
mantra recitation, the various
volendo possiamo
visualizations,
utilizzare termini un
we
po' più mistici,
could use more mystic terms.
tutto assolutamente
Everything, absolutely everything,
parte dal punto in cui noi siamo,
starts from where we are today.
da chi siamo,
It
dalle
starts
risorse che
from the
abbiamo.
resources we have.
Per questo
And for
noi
that
immaginiamo che
reason, I
questa
imagine how a
ci
Buddha
guardi
would be looking at us, saying, I need them to understand How can I make them understand?
Solo che
It's just
noi
that
non parliamo la lingua di Buddha,
we don't speak Buddha's language.
quindi deve parlare a
So
noi
he needs
nella
to,
nostra lingua.
he or she needs to speak to us in our language,
Realtà in cui noi ci
use the
troviamo.
reality in which we find ourselves.
Un po' c'entra e non c'entra.
It's
Ieri leggevo
relative, not
un
relative.
articolo
Yesterday, I read that they recently discovered that this was a study on
che si chiama sperm whale.
whales,
È un
the
tipo di
sperm
baleina
whale. It's a
che
type of whale
sottomarina
that lives deep in the
vengono
ocean,
fuori
and they
e
come up for
molto complessa.
but they have a very complex social fabric life. They do many things in
Hanno
groups,
registrato
and they recorded
migliaia di ore
thousands and thousands of hours of sounds that they emit.
strumenti
And recently, with in artificial intelligence, they were able to decipher some of them, and they found about 156 different sounds. And
che noi in realtà non è che abbiamo chissà quanti suoni, non so
I
quanti
mean,
suoni
it's
abbiamo.
like us. I mean, it's not that we have that many sounds.
30?
I mean,
40?
how many how many sounds are in the
24?
how many sounds are in the alphabet?
Dipende.
24, 30. In Tibetan, it's 30 plus 4.
56
Anyway,
suoni.
they have 156 different sounds with the different various
Adesso stanno
possible
studiando
combinations. And now
quindi che
they're
cos'è
starting this study, and they're convinced that they have a very complex language like ours, if not even more
però si può
complex.
ascoltare.
And that
Noi
reminds
caratteristiche sono
me that
quelle,
we have this
non dimenticare
characteristic, and I don't want to go on too long about this,
quando si studia
that
la corretta visione della
when we
realtà,
study the correct view of reality, one of the keys
ognuno di noi
is
vive
that
all'interno del
each
proprio
one of
paradigma.
us lives within his or her own
Noi
paradigm. And
individuo all'interno del nostro
in
paradigma,
doing
quando
so,
guardiamo verso
when we
l'altro,
look at
noi cerchiamo
another, we
di
try
guardare capire,
to
osservare,
judge,
immaginare
observe, imagine the
il
other
nostro paradigma,
through
immaginiamo
our
quell'altro
own
vivendo nel nostro
paradigm.
paradigma.
We're imagining that
Nel
one
caso
living in
nostro,
our paradigm because in our arrogance, our paradigm is not ours, but is actually the
se noi
reality
abbiamo
of things.
vissuto una cosa
So if the whale doesn't say hello, how can he speak,
che
communicate?
quei suoni strani,
Those
clicchi clicchi,
strange sounds like
cosa
click,
sono?
click, whatever they are. I mean, how can that be a language? Impossible.
E quindi
And
quello che
so
succede è che la
what
nostra
happens is
forza
the
di volontà,
real
la nostra
wisdom
compassione
and
unita alla
the
saggezza, fa
deeper
di noi
sense of compassion united with wisdom is being
adattarsi
able
alle
to
realtà
see
in cui l'altro si
others
trova per
and
riuscire
adapting
a
ourselves
trasmettere
to
quella
that
realtà.
person's reality so uh,
Perciò, per esempio, quando noi
so that
parliamo
we
della
can
rappresentazione dei Buddha, no?
bring a more
Noi,
coherent
allo
um,
stesso tempo
reality.
che
So when we look at the images of
rappresentano
Buddhas, for
ciò
example,
che esiste di più puro,
they
la
represent
purificazione della
the
sacralità,
purification, the embodiment of the
dire
purest,
qualcosa che qualcuno mi
like
dice
wisdom, or
forse c'è un'eresia.
someone might, what I'm about to say might sound like heresy.
La immagine del
The
Buddha
image of the
è quella
Buddha,
che rappresenta la
so on
perfezione
one
della
hand, they
saggezza,
represent the perfection of
della nostra
wisdom, they also represent our own ignorance.
perché?
Why?
Perché
Because
questa immagine,
this
questa
image,
forma che il
this
Buddha presenta,
form
queste
that Buddha
affermazioni sono meramente
manifests with
cosa
through
tali
these
perché noi
teachings,
riconosciamo la
they've
spiritualità delle
this
persone,
is
queste parole mica le immagino
the
così con quei capelli
this is the
strani.
result of having adapted to our way, our reality. They don't look like
Però
that.
questo,
Buddha is a state of being.
però per
But
poterci
to help
comunicare,
us
dare
connect,
forma a ciò che
to
non ha
give a
forma,
form to what doesn't
se
have
vogliamo
form,
farlo
this language is used to come into contact with all of that and help us so that we can develop our own qualities. So this aspect, this marvelous quality of adapting to our reality, and then based on that, show us that which transcends it all, little by little. I don't know if this is clear. It's like teaching anything. If we need to learn something, there's a marvelous aspect and magical. The only resource that we have is what we already know. I don't know if that's clear. When we need to transmit something to someone, we need to use the knowledge that that person already has. And maybe teach new relationships, new concepts, new experiences, but using the building blocks that they already have. But we have this strange idea that when we're explaining something to someone else, we're taking something of ours and inserting it into the mind of that person, when it's not like that. So when a Buddha is in front of a being like us, says, okay, I need to show them. I need to help this being get out of this cycle of samsara. What resources does the Buddha have to help us other than his own unlimited wisdom and compassion and love? What we are. Our own reality, our psychophysical reality of what we are. And this resource, this basis, is called Shino Buletsum in Tibetan, the state of fact, the starting point. Like when we want to help someone, the starting point, other than our own qualities, are the resources of the other one. I don't know, if it's ever happened to you that you wanted to help someone and you say, oh, no, he doesn't understand. No, it's not that the other doesn't understand. It's that I don't have the ability to communicate appropriately according to his needs and resources, because the one who helps is the one who has to adapt. Now, I said that I wasn't going to give a long introduction, but we have quite a few days together, so we naturally, spontaneously, we have four questions and 4 answers, 4 things that are fundamental to our being, to our paradigm, regardless of what it is. These parts that we can say they're structurally part of our being. We suffer, we don't want to suffer. We experience pleasure, we want to experience more pleasure. And we have a kind of free will that we use to try to suffer as little as possible and enjoy as much as possible. So we have this idea of what we project as suffering. What are the things that make us suffer? And what is suffering? Where do we project our happiness? What do we think generates suffering? What are the causes of suffering? And what do we think is good for us? That these are the 4 noble truths. And on the base of this, we try to create something and eliminate something else. The 4 noble truths, it's not that he gave us what didn't exist. He gave us, he showed us what is fundamental to our being from a different perspective. Is that clear? He showed us the resource, what we already have. So when we see different teachings, even those that philosophically speaking, seem more complex, they all start from this state of the starting point where we are, and then the way to access that, to transform that, like developing compassion, for example, altruism, compassion. What's the starting point for developing altruism? It's actually selfishness itself. And Buddha transmitted this crazy way. I mean, it's just really incredible how is able. We're not going to go into details now, but to put this finger right on selfishness and use selfishness itself to transform into altruism and annihilate, eliminate selfishness. I mean, it starts from where we are. It's incredible. When we look at the practices in the Tantra, like the practice of self-healing, and there are many other systems, Yamantaka, Goya Samadra, Vajrayogini, Tarashitamani, and many, many other systems within Vajrayana Buddhism. Often there's this feeling that that Buddhist philosophy is very solid. It's something you can understand, and Tantra is mystical, and that you can't really understand it. Actually, it's not like that. Vajrayana is extremely logical, linear, coherent, and starts where we are, starts with the resources we have, physical, mental, emotional, starts with who we are on a deeper level and how we can use those to become to be different. So in the next few days, at the beginning at least, we'll need a couple days, I'd like to bring you to the understanding, show you, how can I say, look a little bit, look behind the curtain, look at the structure of self-healing, and see the coherence that exists. This is important because sometimes it can happen that there's the part of mantras and mudras and visualizations, and sometimes it might seem, we might think that it's mystical, something beautiful, it's something I feel, but I can't understand exactly what it is, and I stay there. And many times I've heard, I like philosophy, but Tantra, these movements, all these things, it's just these images, they're incomprehensible. I respect that point of view, but when we deepen a little bit more the meaning of how the practices are done, how it all works, we see that there's an absolutely marvelous correspondence. This is something really, really beautiful how they develop. So I'd like to share this understanding a little bit with you in these next days, my own understanding, and within my ability to share. Let's see what comes out of all this. But it's important to understand there's a very, very solid basis. First of all tantric practices start from a very simple but important principle. Understanding is not enough. We can study. We can have great debates on this, that, and the other. And because of mental defilements here, we can learn to make lists and lists. But there are 84,000 mental defilements. We can see how they are look at all their aspects, coarse and more subtle. We can study every passage of the 5 paths and the 10 grounds. We can study every aspect of this. Nothing against it. I love it. But I'm sorry if I say it like this, but it's it's not worth much. That little that it is worth is a lot. But as much as I'm able to describe every mental defilement or know every step of the path, it was marvelous to know all that. But if I don't walk, if I don't familiarize myself through repetition with the light that I want to develop, the qualities I want to develop, the antidote, those qualities will not develop, because we work based on interaction and familiarization. We are the result of all the interactions that we have had in our entire life and for many lives. And the more we repeat a certain action, a type of interaction, the deeper that aspect becomes. So the key is not understanding. Understanding gives us the right direction, but the key is generating what we want to become and repeating it again and again. Just a billion times, little by little. Because actually, it's that process of repetition, remembering that every interaction inevitably brings a transformation. So when I generate certain thoughts, certain experiences, naturally they transform me in a certain way. So the path is based on 3 parts. First there's listening, and then understanding, and then there's the process of familiarization. And in this process of familiarization, we need methods, we need tools that help us enter into contact with these antidotes, that help us develop these antidotes: love, patience, generosity, humbleness, awareness, peace itself, joy. There are many antidotes. And we need somehow to familiarize ourselves with these antidotes and generate them in a constant way, from a coarse level to a deeper level, because the deeper we're able to develop these states, because it's not just conceptual. We have we're more like an iceberg, where the conceptual part of us is what is on top, but the part that we're unaware of, non-conceptual, is much greater than our conceptual mind. In psychology, in Western psychology, you talk about the subconscious, for example. So once we have the clarity, okay, where suffering comes from, what are the antidotes to reach this state of balance and peace. In other words, once we have a certain clarity on the Four Noble Truths, and now is not the time to go into the details of that, an important thing to do for us is to familiarize ourselves with these states. And it's particularly tiresome to generate a mental state in an abstract way. Let me explain myself. To familiarize our mind, first of all, we need to induce a certain state of consciousness, stay in that state. For example, how can I familiarize myself with love? I need to feel love and stay with that state of mind. To familiarize myself with love, I don't need to think about the meaning of love. In that case, I would be familiarizing myself with the concept of love. So we can find many people who are absolutely expert in love, but they don't feel love. This exists. So familiarizing ourselves with love is not about getting used to the meaning of love, but familiarizing ourselves with the feeling itself. So even in an artificial way, we need to induce this state of love. It doesn't come, maybe it may not come spontaneously. So the fewer um, external stimuli I have, distractions I have, the stronger this feeling will become. I mean, if I'm trying to familiarize myself with love, I induce a state of love, but at the same time I'm thinking of 20 different things, I'll have less of a transformation. A short time ago, I was reading something about stress, and there was an explanation. The result, in a negative way, depends also on a physical level. And so how one object hits another, like let's say if this object breaks, it depends on the strength, the frequency, and the relationship between the one object and another. So it's clear if I have the habit of being selfish, self-centered, but I want to familiarize myself with altruism, I need to repeat that often. I need to generate that altruistic state many, many times before I'm able to really generate that feeling, that state of mind. But the more constant it is, the more frequent it is, the easier it will be to break that first tendency. So if I want to generate a state of love, and in the middle of that, I have distractions and many other minds, of course, a weaker interaction will lead to a weaker result. If I can feel love in 10 seconds in an hour, it's 10 seconds. But if I'm able to feel it for 60 seconds for 60 minutes within that hour, that will lead to a greater change. So when we familiarize ourselves with these, we should be familiarizing ourselves with these positive, virtuous states for meditation in general. So if I sit down and breathe, etc. Now meditate on love. It'd be very difficult, not impossible, but it'd be hard to generate a feeling of love without connecting to an image or something. If I just say feel love, it'd be tiresome, right? Instead, if there are two ways. One, induce a process through images where naturally that feeling of love, it's a natural consequence. So for example, if I imagine another being and I observe that being, I see his suffering, I want that being to be happy, and I imagine doing something to bring the happiness to that being. What am I generating? What feeling? It's love. If I do something to eliminate the suffering of that being, I'm familiarizing myself with compassion. So the use of visualization, you can see that its purpose is to generate a state of mind, a state of being, of consciousness. And we can we can familiarize ourselves with symbols. Symbols have an enormous power. A symbol can speak louder and longer than an entire book. In the time in modern times, in many societies of the richer societies, so what's worth more, the actual factories or a logo? Let's take let's take Coca-Cola for example. What is worth more, the logo or all all the bottles of Coca-Cola around the world in every factory? It's crazy, but it's the logo. The first time I read about this, it was from a book called No Logo. Anyway, what happens with this is the name that is given to something has an enormous power. And so, in the same way that I go there, I think of a logo or something, that identity, that 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 brand name, it's a concept, and has an enormous power, because behind that brand name, how many how much is represented? I don't know. Think about a brand that there's some brands that like represents quality, for example. And if that is made well or not, but that brand and already gives the idea of quality. Symbols is something that over time, that symbol acquires meaning. Even symbols that we do with our hands, like this symbol, for example, what does that mean? If you're walking towards me and I do that, what does that mean? For most of us, what does it mean? Stop. Unfortunately, when the Iraqi war started, it happened that the first block that they made, the 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 American soldiers, did that gesture, and they didn't stop, and then they killed everyone who came towards them, and then they learned that in that culture, that gesture actually means welcome. You know, these are things that we construct over time. So what happens is that once a symbol obtains meaning or power, obtaining power is marvelous, because through that symbol we can access everything that's behind it. And so when we take different concepts, so states of consciousness that we want to develop, qualities, and we take all of that and we nourish that quality, do we nourish that symbol with all those qualities? And then at a certain point, we identify ourselves with that symbol. And when I identify myself with that symbol, I naturally am identifying myself with everything that symbol represents. When we take an image of a Buddha, gradually we attribute meaning to that image. We attribute love, compassion, stability, joy, etc., etc. And once that image, and that's a symbol, once that image represents all of that on a deep level beyond words, when I see myself as that symbol, I am a Buddha. I naturally am what? I'm everything that that image, that symbol represents. And this is one of the fastest ways to familiarize ourselves with the qualities, to induce that state in, and it goes absolutely beyond any conceptual process. Because if I say try to generate an inner state where you identify yourself with love and awareness and peace, and this is too much, too much. But if I little by little I nourish a symbol with meaning, and at a certain point I become that symbol, I am that Buddha, naturally I am everything that that represents. I'm able to induce that state of being and identify myself with those qualities. Are you following? So this is one of the aspects. There are many. One of the aspects of this method used within Vajrayana Buddhism, where all of these images that we see, they're symbols. They're there to represent things that go beyond words. The Buddhas are not in the same way. I don't think at all that one is reborn in Tushita, in the Pure Land. You go and meet Lama Tsongkhapa or Atisha, and then you think he's exactly the same as in the Tanka. No, I don't think it's like that. So there's states that go beyond the images, the aspect and form. And what we want to familiarize ourselves goes really beyond the form, but to generate that which doesn't have form, we do it through form. I don't know if that's clear. You use the form to connect with what transcends form. That's why there's also a saying that says, Nomena ahun pe. Without sutra, Tantra is hun hun pe pe, which means even if hun hun pe pe means a lot, but and one day maybe we look at the meaning of hun and pe, just in the symbol of hun, this seed syllable. There's all of Buddha's teachings and the correct view of reality, and pe, literally, what does it mean? Does anybody know? At the end of many mantras, there's pe. It means to clean, like to sweep away. What does that mean? Pe in the mantra, eliminate the grasping at inherent existence. Pe is already a lot. Hum already so much. It's the non-dual union of relative and ultimate reality, the ultimate state of purity of body and mind. But this saying is saying that without the basis of philosophy and all the teachings, that Tantra there is just drawings, but one doesn't exist. In Tantra, Sutra is a fundamental point, and the more you study the Sutra, the more you understand the Tantra. When you start understanding better what correct view of reality is, for example, or direct valid cognitions, or inferential cognitions, or states that are similar to a dream, etc. When you start studying these things, the rest starts making sense. Even if we look at the 5 paths, Anyway, all of this has is represented in by symbols, and beyond behind every symbol there's a tremendous amount of richness, and we need to nourish these symbols also, because I don't know exactly how to explain this in a way that's logical or easy to understand. I don't think that it's said that more people, when more people attribute a meaning to something, understanding or grasping that meaning becomes easier. There's a theory called the morphogenetic field that talks about this. Anyway, the point is, when we take a symbol that was used for centuries to mean something else, it's easier to connect to the real meaning behind the symbol. I've always said, if we want to make a sadhana Mickey or a lineage of Mickey and Minnie Mouse, if it works, then let's do it. But there is the importance of lineage, this transmission from century, from master to disciple. But there are many aspects like mudra and movements, some colors, mantra, all of this to help us connect and familiarize ourselves with virtuous states of mind. This is our objective. I think it's quite clear. Yes, more or less. As I said before, when you explain something, the resource that you have is or what the others actually have. So sometimes when I ask if people are following and they say yes, it's a strong yes. Sometimes it's a weary yes. There's a master when he translated text, Geshe Kelsen Gyatso. I heard this story, but I don't know if it's really true. When he translated from Tibetan into English, and then he had those same texts translated from English into Tibetan to make sure that the translation was correct. And it reminds me sometimes of Lama Ganshin in Tibet. He would say something to someone. He would say, "Have you understood?" And they would say, "Los." And in Tibetan, los is both yes and no. They have very strange words. Have you understand? Los. What have you understand? Los. So Rinpoche would say, okay, and he would explain, okay, now tell me, what did you understand? I want to hear it. I want to hear it back. And very often they hadn't understood at all, because when there's this a profound respect, then when you're in front of Lama Ganshin, for the first time in your life, you feel overwhelmed, and maybe the neurons are like the synapses are not connecting. So los was a way to answer with respect, but maybe they weren't even understanding the question. But he would say, "Now repeat back to me. What have you understood?" And then they wouldn't know, and then he would explain a difference. So when I ask you, have you understood? It's important for me too to have some feedback, because I don't need to repeat the same thing in 20 different ways. If you haven't understood, well, even 30 is fine. But what I wanted to bring more than anything else in the practice of self-healing, like in all Vajrayana practices, there's a marvelous logic. There's a correspondence. It's like And little by little in these days, we'll open this logic up to understand it better. Today, we touched 2 points mostly. One, that understanding is not enough. We need to repeat certain states of consciousness, but to induce those states of consciousness, we need to either use visualizations, like when we do mantra visualizations, like to generate love and compassion. We visualize other beings and we help them. And if you see in the practices, I mean, this afternoon, for example, when I said light rays are emanate, they go to all beings, suffering beings, and they're they're adapting to the needs, um, and the needs of these beings, and bringing them this, that, and the other. So I've been asked, if we repeated this many times, and people asked, well, I've already done this. So the second time, everyone has already reached Buddhahood. So why do I need to do it again? But no, it's a question of familiarization, repetition. So every time we emanate these light rays, that 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 help all these beings, I am familiarizing myself with love, compassion, um, equality, and joy. So it's not like, okay, you over there, I don't like you as much, so fewer light rays. When we're light rays to everyone in the same way, it's equality. And when we imagine that those light rays bring that which brings happiness, that's love. When we imagine that those light rays help those um, get out of their suffering, it's compassion. When we feel joy for those who have reached that state of well-being and peace, that's rejoicing, that's joy. These are the four immeasurables. Another way to connect is by connecting to symbols. These symbols, we need to little by little nourish them with meaning. Because the more we nourish these symbols with meaning, when we connect with that symbol, we're able to really connect with what it represents. And going back to the example from before, these these big companies, they try to create a company culture and nourish that with meaning. I was in Brazil once. I remember the TV was on. I went into a room. My father was there, a room that I hardly ever go into. And I went into this room, and the TV was on, and it was it was an it was an advertisement, but it was strange because it was incredibly long. It lasted minutes with beautiful, beautiful images of nature, with beautiful music, images of the Amazon. It was really beautiful. And at the end of these minutes of marvelous nature, there was nothing other than the logo of Shell Oil. What were they doing? They were nourishing that symbol with the meaning that they wanted to give. So when you see the logo of Shell, you think of the nature and the respect for nature. So whether it's like that or not, I don't know. But in the meantime, they're nourishing their logo with this idea. So in Buddha Vajrayana, we have 5 main symbols that are represented in many, many different ways. We have the colors, the 5 colors. We have the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, the 5 great mothers. We have the 5 symbols, 5 seed syllables, etc. And we need to little by little learn why they're 5. I'm not going to touch on that now. There are 5. They're five not because there are five Dhyani Buddhas, but because we are made up of five aggregates. And to transform this reality, we use these symbols so that we can transform different aspects of our being. So little by little, we need to learn how to we need to feed these symbols so that we can then connect these qualities. The last thing, another fundamental aspect of Vajrayana Buddhism that modern science has discovered in recent years, but Buddha talked about this from the beginning, is the fact that when we imagine something for our being, physically or mentally, it's as if we were actually living that experience. And this is one of the great problems that we have for modern stress, because if I'm actually under threat and I have like a high levels of cortisol, or if this threat is just mental, my body reacts in the same way. If I imagine that something could happen to me, the cortisol goes up and the body reacts. Just imagining something, for better or worse, the body will react to that um, possible threat. And the process of the practice of self-healing is an amazing practice of visualization. This is what I wanted to talk about today. Remind everyone that we have a marvelous tool in our hands, very powerful and accessible, and and um, and efficacious. So help us reach a deeper and more stable state of well-being and peace. So, of course, we need to unite this with a healthier lifestyle. But we have something that Lama Michel Rinpoche gave to us. He called it a terma of the mind. The terma means, in Tibetan, it means treasure. A treasure is something hidden in Tibet at a certain point. The famous termas were, it was said that certain masters at a certain point, they had teachings for whom they didn't have this room. There weren't disciples who were who could have received those teachings, and so it's said that they hid these teachings, these secret teachings, and then they were found again centuries later. So Lama Ganchen says that the practice of self-healing was actually a secret terma hidden in his mind stream. So the way it was transmitted, Trobo Lotsawa, I don't remember exactly when he lived. It was a few centuries ago. It was a previous life of Lama Ganchen Rinpoche. And Rinpoche said that Trobo Lotsawa, when he had these teachings, it was too different and there wasn't the right context to transmit them. So he kept them within his own mind stream. And many lives afterwards, there were the right conditions to transmit and teach these teachings. When I showed the practice of self-healing to my master, Kachen Losang Punsak, the abbot of Tashilumpo, the one of the most learned and recognized um, practitioner and scholar of Buddhism at the time he left his body just a few years ago. When I showed him the practice of self-healing, first thing he asked me was, how did Lama Kanchen come up with this? And I said, it wasn't a logical process, but it was like a memory from previous lives, like visions that he had. He said, only like this, otherwise it's just impossible to, to, to create it. And I've always said, and I believe it deeply, I, even when Rinpoche was alive, was that the greatest gift that he's leaving us is the practice of self-healing. These last 4 days of Ramen Chemo that we just did, if you want to understand the Ramen Chemo, study or do self-healing, or all the practices of the highest yoga tantra like Heruka or Yamantaka, etc., practice self-healing. From there, everything else really seems simple. Even in these last years with Rinpoche, at a certain point, Lama Kanchen chose to do different retreats. At a certain point, why don't we focus on the retreat of self-healing? He said, well, actually, we just need that. We don't need anything else. But we have our attachments to a certain practice or another. And of course, those are important too. But the practice of self-healing is something so marvelous, and there's so much within that it's really up to us to deepen it um, and keep it in our lives, in our hearts, because the only way that we can be sure that the future generations will have access to self-healing is by keeping the practice safe. It's not about putting it somewhere safe. It's about practicing it, realizing it, because that's what will give the possibility to others afterwards to have access to it. So I really hope that in the next couple days and in your lives as well, that we can deepen your understanding of the practice. This afternoon, I gave some different elements just to show you that there are different levels on which we can practice. That's all for now. It's time for our dedications, and I I need to go as soon as we finish because I have an appointment at 7 o'clock, so I'll be a little bit late.
Lame kutse rapten chi nam kar trile chochur ge padan lo san tempe drume sasumgi drove munsel takto ne gyurchi kewa kunto yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche chi sadan lamge yente rabzo ne dorje change kopa nyurtobsho nimo dele tsendele Nime kuyan delek shin yinsen takto delek pe kuncho sumki chingi loba kuncho sumki ngodrub sol kuncho sumki trashi shu.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us achieve all realizations and sprinkle our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
May the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Trashidele. We'll see each other tomorrow at 7 in 11 hours and 59 minutes.